You don't choose to like Evangelion.
Evangelion chooses you.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first part of Congratulations. If you're a fan of the show, then you automatically get what I mean, but I'll just say right now, spoilers. This is a retrospective, so this is most likely going to be driven towards people who have seen the show before, like myself. This is probably my 6th viewing of the show, and only finally am I actually going to be standing in front of the camera talking about it. But I'm doing something different with this. I'm not talking about the show as a whole. If I did that, I'd be here for about 24 hours, and even then I wouldn't even be scratching the surface. I'm doing this episode by episode, meaning that when I upload an episode onto YouTube, that means I have watched another episode and I'm going to be talking about it. And what am I going to be talking about? Well, judging by the title, you already know. I am talking about Neon Genesis Evangelion, the show by Hideaki Anno. This show is beautiful. I love everything about the show, and let me just set some ground rules right now as to what it's about, or what the show's going to be about. I'm not going to be talking about the Rebuild movies. I'm not. Okay? I'm not. I like the Rebuild movies, but to me, they're not the show. They're not the show. I will pick the show and the End of Evangelion over the Rebuild movies any day. That's primarily what I'm going to be focusing on, as I'm going to be focusing on the 24-episode anime, Neon Genesis Evangelion, well, the finale, which is the End of Evangelion, which means, yes, I'm going to be talking about the infamous episode 24 and episode 25 and 26, as well as talk about the End of Evangelion, which I think is a masterpiece. Let's just start off with the basics. Neon Genesis Evangelion is a show created by Hideaki Anno, which Hideaki Anno at the time was extremely depressed. His dream project that he had just worked off, forgive me for forgetting the title, it was a flop. It was a colossal flop. It was actually one of the biggest flops in Japan that year, if not the biggest. And he was devastated by this. Add to the fact that he was having terrible girl troubles. He was already suffering from depression already. He was suffering with problems with God. He was blaming God for stuff. He had a drinking problem. All this stuff piling up, and let that just sink in. And all of that comes out in this fucking show. Actually, no. What I recommend, if you're watching this and if you have the show with you, actually, I'm pretty sure you can find it online for free. What I actually suggest is before you watch this episode of Congratulations, watch that episode of Neon Genesis Evangelion. For example, what I'm going to talk about with all these beautiful notes once I'm done rambling on here about why I love Neon Genesis Evangelion so much. We're actually going to be talking about episode 1, which is Angel Attacks. Wonderful title. Just pulls you right in, right? Anyways, so I've heard this comparison done a lot. Hayao Miyazaki makes the animes made for children and for adults too, but at a different level. He makes like the Pixar style kind of anime movies, Spirited Away and all that. Many people have compared him to Steven Spielberg. People say Hayao Miyazaki is the Steven Spielberg of anime. Alright, that's pretty simple to understand, especially if you understand anime. That's pretty easy to understand. Now let this sink in, what I'm about to say. Hideaki Anno, therefore, is the Stanley Kubrick of anime. Now, if you think about that for a second, and you haven't seen the show before, 1, watch this fucking show right now, you will not regret it. But 2, you already know how fucked up this shit's gonna get. The show gets really fucked up really quick. And not in, like, the blood pinata kind of way, where some animes go really fucking over the top in terms of how messed up they get. Like, you shoot somebody, they explode, you beat up a dead puppy and do all that kind of Mira Nikki, for example. This show is messed up in the sense that it really does fuck with your brain. This show makes you think. And that's what I like about it. That's what draws me into it. This show makes you think. It makes you analyze how life works. It makes you question your own character. It makes you question life in general. It makes you question society. It makes you question everything that goes on with your world. And that's something that I love about this show as well. Neon Genesis Evangelion really does target the individual. What I might experience with Neon Genesis Evangelion, you might not experience with Neon Genesis Evangelion. And though I'm not quite at the level of fangirl, though Andre's Kaiju Noir would argue quite differently, I can easily say that I am a rather large Evangelion enthusiast. This show is beautiful. This show basically has inspired me, like, ridiculously in terms of how I write and how I approach things. Alright? Not only... Let me name off a couple movies that inspired me in terms of how I make films. The Wild Bunch, Deaths in Slow Motion and the Blood. Kwaidan and the Human Condition. Actually, any movie by Misaki Kobayashi. In terms of how I shoot, in terms of how I stage, in terms of how I light. Anything by Stanley Kubrick. That is where I get my cinematography from. This is where I get my editing style from. Neon Genesis Evangelion, 2 big points. One is lighting. If there's anything you'll get out of the show, the lighting is beautiful. And 2, the symbolism. There's a shit ton of symbolism in Neon Genesis Evangelion, and I will definitely get into that a little later. Because it's not very prominent in the first 8 episodes, at least, of the show. It's the later half of the show that the religious symbolism, despite what Hideki Anno has said in the interviews, it means a lot. And I'm actually going to debunk and disprove what he says, hopefully if I can remember it by the time I get to probably episode 22 or 23. Now before I really get into the video, before I get into episode 1, I'm going to be taking this episode by episode. I have seen this show, as I've said many times before. I love the show, and every time I watch it I'll notice something new. In fact, I've already noticed several things new that I've taken down on this beautiful piece of paper with notes that I just noticed with this current viewing, with certain things playing in the back of my head from what I've both read, what I've heard, and what I've also seen. Meaning that I'll bring some stuff up and say I'll talk about it later. Meaning I will talk about it later because it becomes even more prominent and more important in a future episode, or even in the End of Evangelion. Let us dive into Neon Genesis Evangelion, Episode 1, Angel Attack. Let me just start off with the characters. Though the first character you see is Shinji Ikari, who's the little 14-year-old shrimp dick fuck. I'm going to talk about Misato first, because she's not my favorite character, but she is probably overall, she's the most complex. No one can deny that. No one can deny that. She is one of the more complex characters next to Ritsuko, which we will get into, trust me. What we get with Misato, she's very kind on the outside. For example, she comes to pick Shinji up, despite the fact that there's a fucking war going on around them with fucking Angel. She picks him up and they drive to NERV, and she's putting on this very kind persona on the outside, which is a major foreshadow. And she's looking over at Shinji, and they're talking. She's being very preppy, and I think that's something with her character that Hideki Anno wanted, was to make her kind of preppy. And that kind of thing, or at least on the outside, because trust me, when you find out what's with her on the inside, that's enough to rape your mind on its own without all the other shit that takes place. But she really is, at least presented in this episode, she automatically presents herself as kind of a normal young woman, a person who's just out of college, a person who's trying to make it. I mean, she's got a very good job working with NERV. I love this. When the N2 mind is dropped on the Angel and doesn't work, but the car gets flipped over and she has to ask Shinji to help her push it over, and they do. First off, awesome that it's covered with duct tape. That is such an awesome little touch with the animation, is that suddenly you see this nice, beautiful car that picks Shinji up after the N2 mine goes off. It's suddenly covered with duct tape and the bumper is flapping around all over the place. It is really, that is a nice little subtle touch with the animation, and it made me laugh. And I couldn't believe it. I didn't notice it until this viewing, that it was covered with tape. It's like, duh, what the fuck's wrong with you? You cover shit with duct tape all the time. You should see my first tripod. I still got that son of a bitch. The thing's more duct tape than it is tripod. And so when I see this girl driving down a car, one, I'm like, there's no way that thing could possibly pass inspection now. And two, I'm laughing my ass off because I'm like, oh my god, that's totally something I'd do. Yeah, and then I love it how she's keeping a smile, but suddenly it like goes into her brain, and like everything around her goes black, and so it's just her freaking out, and she's like, oh my god, I just got this car. Holy shit, I still got like a shit ton of payments on it. Oh my god. Add this on top of all the loans that I have from school. Add this with the rent. Add this with this. And she's acting like a normal fucking human being. It's a bit of a refresher seeing this because there's a lot of times where we see characters where they're too over cocky or they're too perfect. A recent example of this is the main character, Dan, in Ultra 7. I hate his guts. I fucking hate his guts. He's too perfect. I hate him. And that's why I hate him, is because he's too perfect. Misato, right from the get-go, I like, because you already know she's a flawed individual. She's stressed. She's a normal human being. I love that she's just a normal person. Hideki Anno, I applaud him for doing that. And all of the characters, yes, they have their major flaws. Major flaws! But they're human. And I think that's something that he really wanted to get across, was that all these characters are human. They are imperfect beings. And a lot of anime, not just anime, but just shows in general, ignore the human side of shit. They just go with, this character's this character's this, this character's this, this character's this. And they ignore the nooks and crevices that makes people who they are, that makes people the individuals. And that's something that I love about Neon Genesis Evangelion, is it doesn't forget that there's a lot of loopholes with how humans interact with each other. I have a lot of loopholes. Everyone does, whether they want to admit it or not. Everyone fucking does. And I think it's just perfect with how Hideki Anno handles these characters. Anyways, back to Misato. You can totally tell that she's a noob when she arrives at NERV, because she gets lost just going to introduce Shinji to probably Gendo and the Evangelion Unit 01. She gets fucking lost. And she openly is like, I guess I'm just not used to this place yet while they're traveling up and down the totally epic escalators. First off, I love escalators as it is, and I saw those. I'm like, oh! I'd spend all day on those. Oh my god, I'm such a like little tiny fucking kid when it comes to escalators. I'll go to the mall, for example. The only reason why I'll go to the mall is not to buy anything, but just to go up and down the escalators. Oh my fucking god, I love escalators. And if you say, I personally don't like escalators, I think they're stupid, you're fucking lying. Everyone loves escalators. Everyone fucking loves them. It's like elevators. You enjoy elevators. You should probably take the stairs. You're fit enough. But you take the elevator anyway, you lazy fuck. What the fuck does that have to do with Neon Genesis Evangelion? Back to Neon Genesis Evangelion. But anyways, I just like how she's clearly a noob. And when I get to Ritsuko, I'll actually discuss more proof that she's a noob. My aunt's calling the birds. And then I love it how when Shinji finally gets introduced to the Eva Unit 01, and both Ritsuko and Gendo are like, "In the damn robot, Shinji!" He's like, "No!" She defends him. At first. She actually does. She's like, maybe he's not ready. Well, no, fuck, he's not ready. But I'll get to that a little later. But she defends Shinji. And she's actually like, oh man. Oh fuck. Should have done this sooner. But then what strikes me is that as soon as she sees that both Ritsuko and Gendo are like, pilot the damn robot, Shinji, suddenly she's like, huh. Looks down at him. Pilot the damn robot, Shinji! That's just proof, more proof, as to the fact that she's a noob. Yes, she has that individuality, but because she's a new person, she's the new person on the block. Or at least I think she is, at least that's what this episode was portraying. Suddenly, when everyone else has a different opinion than hers, she conforms to that other opinion. Which, knowing Hideki Anno at the time, that makes sense. Because he was reading the DSM-4, he was reading how humans interact with each other. And that fucking happens. That happens to everybody. And once again, if you say it doesn't happen to you, you're fucking lying. Yes, you do. What Misato does differently that I actually applaud is that you have Gendo up on a high balcony being like, pilot the damn robot, Shinji! And then you have Ritsuko down there being like, Shinji, you're such a pussy, pilot the robot. And Shinji's like, yeah. Misato actually takes a different approach. Misato crouches down next to him, which is interesting, because Gendo would never fucking do that, because Gendo's a douchebag. And Ritsuko wouldn't do that because she's just a fucking shell of a woman. But Misato actually gets down on her knees and be like, Shinji, we need you to pilot this robot. Shinji, we need your help. Shinji, we fucking need you. Why is a little confusing, but I will get into that later. So that was really interesting with her. And also, just going back to when she suddenly turns, when she turns on Shinji, but though she doesn't in the light matter, she still does turn on Shinji. May I just say that that is some significant foreshadow that I never noticed until this viewing. That is some significant foreshadow to what happens with her and Kaji. When we first meet Kaji, and we discover that the relationship that they have major foreshadow. Major fucking foreshadow right there. On to pussy, I mean Shinji. Actually, you know what? I'm not doing Shinji justice. I like Shinji. I really do. I'll get into why I like Shinji the further along I get into the show. But all I can say right now is that I relate to him. That's why I like him so much. Alright? I admit it, there's only two types of people in this world. The people that like Shinji, well, let me just define that. If you like Shinji, usually the people who like Shinji, and this is me included, don't like him because of how he acts. Let's be honest, he is a whiny little bitch. What we like about Shinji is that, one, he's relatable, two, he's very innocent, and three, and most importantly, for me anyways, he's just such a great way to dive into the human psyche. He can be happy, he can be sad, he's a loner, but yet he wants to have friends. I can personally relate to that part right there, especially that part where he's alone and but he wants friends. But that's what the people who like Shinji usually do. He's the person that they can talk about the most, because he is probably the most interesting, or the most in-depth character here. Now, I don't mean in-depth as in 3D character or round character, because in all reality, let's face it, there really isn't any of those characters in Neon Genesis Evangelion. In fact, if you call them 3D, you basically go from 3D to 1D, because this is the only show I've ever seen where the characters regress instead of digress, or instead of progress. And the other type of person in the world are those who hate Shinji. People who call him the whiny little bitch because he is a whiny little bitch. Which brings me to say this. If you do not like Shinji, too deep for you. Too deep for you, man. Anyways, on to Shinji. Okay, Shinji right from the get-go, he's already a downer. He's like, oh, guess I'll just go to the shelters. Nobody wants to talk to me. I mean, everyone's evacuated. But I guess I'll just go there. And that's how Shinji's acting, and Shinji's very down. You don't know why. You don't. And then the other thing that I noticed is that he shoots down Misato's optimism by saying, "You're childish for your age." Okay, now one, that's being a Debbie Downer, you fuck. That's being a Debbie Downer. But the other thing that I like about that is that he's only 14 years old. Shinji Ikari is only 14 years old. And he's telling Misato, you know, you're pretty immature for your age. For your age. You're pretty immature for your age. Now, at the time, we don't know why that is. We don't know why he's saying this. But we know that something's up. We know that there's something that has happened in Shinji Ikari's past that hasn't been good. Just because of that one line. And that sets you up for the scene that's about to fucking come. Which is my favorite scene in this episode. You're childish, again, just to talk about you're childish for your age. We discover in my favorite scene in the episode that Shinji has been abandoned by everyone. He has literally been living on his own. Being a 14-year-old kid, that's gonna leave some fucking scars. For all those people who hate Shinji and say he's just a whiny little bitch, I dare, what if you were in his situation? What if you were pretty much left to fend for yourself. Your father never wanted to see you except to use you. What would you be like? I bet you wouldn't be the happy, preppy individual that you are today. Fuck no! You'd be an extremely sadistic little bastard. You'd be A, stealing shit off of people's plates, or B, a complete inverted individual. And that's what Shinji is. Now the most interesting part in this episode is when the Eva Unit 01 reaches out and protects Shinji from when the angel shoots its cross into the geofront, and everything's shaking and the beams start falling down and all that horse shit, and suddenly the hand, or like a beam, is about to fall down, which, let me tell you, this clearly inspired a certain scene from my Godzilla the Immortal book. But the Eva unit reaches out and protects Shinji. Not Rei, not Misato, not Ritsuko, not anyone else. It protects Shinji. Now, I'll admit, the first time I watched this, I was like, what the fuck just happened? And what I like about it was clearly all the other characters, except for Rei, because, well, Rei's crumpled over in pain, are like, what the fuck just happened? Now, I'll get into more of what that means later, but what I'm going to tell you right now, major fucking foreshadow. This episode is full of fucking foreshadow, like there's no fucking tomorrow. Gendo Ikari, Shinji's dad. I'm not afraid to admit, as I almost fall over, I'm not afraid to admit that Gendo, I'm not afraid to admit that Gendo Ikari is my favorite character. Is he the deepest character? No. But you know what? You're talking to a fan of the elusive man. I like mysterious bad guys. And you know what? Like the elusive man, Gendo isn't a bad guy. But I will get into that later, especially when we get to the End of Evangelion. Though many people consider him to be the villain of the show, if you really look at it, other than Seele, which we haven't even been introduced to Seele yet, he's not really the villain. He's a tragic individual. He's a tragic character. And I saw this thing, and I'll get into it later. Gendo is Shinji if he grows up. If Shinji keeps going down the path that he has been going down his life, he's going to grow up to be just like his dad. I'm not going to get into any more details than that yet. But let that just sink into your brain, and I bet you if you've already seen the show, you know where I'm going with that. But anyways, what did I notice about Gendo? Right from the get-go, he's very mysterious. He's always sitting with the stereotypical thing where you never see his mouth moving. I love that fucking stare. I love how his glasses always reflect Matrix style. He also has a very serious voice. Talks very monotone. Very almost calm, if you listen to it carefully. And it doesn't matter if you're listening to the dub, which I have to admit, one of the best dubs ever for this show, but I always usually watch it in the Japanese. But even the Japanese voice actor played him very deadpan, very monotone. Very much, if he's giving an order, this is what he sounds like. But he never inflects any kind of tone or pitch in his voice. He just speaks in one monotone voice. That's what he sounds like. And I love that gaze that he gives. Even if you can't see through his eyes, you know who he's looking at. Because of those epic glasses that he wears, you know who the fuck he's looking at. And that gaze can fucking kill. How do you think he won over Ryutsuki? But yet, to contrast with his serious tone and to contrast with his leadership, notice what he's wearing. He's wearing very lax civilian kind of clothing. Except for the gloves. The gloves are army-issued gloves. Which the gloves are badass, which I love why he wears the gloves towards the end of the series when you discover what's on his hand. If you look at his show, especially in this where you have all these army guys in there, and you have all this shit going down, all this heavy shit going down with the army fighting the angel, he's sitting there, and he's like all laxed and shit. Not quite like the dude from The Big Lebowski lax, but he's pretty goddamn lax, all things considered. Especially compared to all the army guys standing around him, when they're all wearing their highly decorated uniforms. Hell, even Ryutsuki, especially, like, Ryutsuki's wearing his button-up gray uniform, and even the guys at NERV who are sitting in front of him that we get to know later in the series, and are actually quite likable. Even they're in like some dressy kind of uniform, and he's wearing this shirt that's unbuttoned and everything like that. It just, to me, that is a perfect contrast with his dead seriousness, and I love it. Also, I noticed this in this one too. when the military admit defeat against the Angel and hand the power over to him to use the Evas, or to basically hand the fight, or the war against giants, or the fight against giants, or the fight against the Fag, he has to push up his glasses, and I didn't notice this until this viewing. He has a smile on his face. Inside, I bet you Gendo's like, fuck yeah, I just fucking won this. I told you you couldn't defeat the Angels. I told you the only way you can fucking defeat one of those motherfuckers is if you give it to NERV. If you give it to me. And he's proud of himself. And I personally think that's what Hideki Anno was going for after this new viewing. I just noticed it, but if you look very carefully when he's pushing up his glasses, he's got this big shit-eating grin underneath his face. So clever and it's so clever and so well done. And then comes my favorite scene in the movie where he goes, "It's been a while, Shinji." That is the first thing he says to his fucking son. And he's not even speaking to his son really face to face. They're separated by this glass wall. And he's way up in a balcony playing God, while Shinji is down there, a lowly peon. Really? That's the first thing you can fucking say to your son, leaving him away? But again, that goes into Gendo's character, which makes me want to know more. He's so elusive. He's so dark. I want to know about this guy's past. And if you want to know something in terms of how they're written, that means, to me, that means that the writer and the people who have worked on this show, and that includes the voice actor or the animators, in this case, they've done their fucking job. They earned their goddamn paycheck. Because that's the key with Gendo. You want to learn more about him. You want to know, what the fuck's up with this jerk? You want to know why he is the way he is. And though I have that with other characters, the first time I watched it, I remember saying specifically, I want to know who the fuck this Gendo individual is. He was the first character that I was like, I want to know exactly his backstory. I want to know his backstory. I'm going to do research on this motherfucker. With that, let's go into Rei. Because Rei is introduced in this episode, which I just want to say, I love how Rei was originally going to be a parody on all the emotionless bitches that anime like to present, and she wound up becoming the staple of emotionless bitches in anime. Oh, the irony. But anyways, there's not much to say about Rei, but what we get of her is significant. I love how when Shinji refuses to pilot the Eva, he's like, Gendo's like, Ritsuko, get Rei. Yes. And then he says a line that's so cold, it gave me freezer burn. He's like, can she, Ritsuko is like, can she pilot it? And Gendo goes, she isn't dead. That gave me chills. That line gave me fucking chills. But on to Rei. What's interesting, and why I actually wrote this down, is that she complies with this. Not that she really has a choice, but she's still willing to pilot the Eva. Despite being banged up all the shit. Despite the fact that when she falls over, when Shinji is holding her up, there's blood on his hands. Great symbolism, by the way. There are blood on his hands. Her blood is now on his hands, which is great symbolism if you really look at it, because her blood is on his hands. That's the moment where he's like, I have to pilot this. Her blood is now on my hands. It's my fault that she's bleeding. I've got to pilot this. This is my fucking problem now. Back to Rei. Again, there's not really much to say there. But she complies despite Shendo being... She complies despite Gendo being a dick. Interesting. I bet you that's going to play a significant role on what the fuck am I going to say. You know, especially if you watch the show, that it's going to play a significant role later. So I'll talk about it when we get there. And let me tell you, there's a lot to talk about in this case. And then, to me, it just kind of speaks for his character that she's either extremely brave at this point, or, as we come to find out, that she is so brain-beaten that her purpose in life is to pilot the Eva and that's it. That she's like, I have to pilot it. It's my job. I've got to do this. I could sit back. I mean, you got a million other Reis sitting down in your basement, Gendo. I don't see why you can't pick one of them. But I've got to do this. This is my job. This is my thing. I've got to pilot this Eva. I've got to defeat this angel to defend humanity. Which I'll get into a little later. Ritsuko. Ritsuko. You're a crazy bitch. You're a crazy cat lady. I gotta admit, when I first watched this show, When we found out Ritsuko's backstory and how messed up of a fucking human being she is, it came out of completely left field. But what's interesting is, like Misato, she puts on a persona. Even when I was first watching this, I knew she dyed her hair. And that is a clever little way to warn the audience, and unfortunately I didn't catch on to it until probably my third viewing, that there's something off about her. There's something different about her. And I think that's what works. I think that's what works really well. Is that there's something off about her, but at this time you can't really place it. Like Misato. Actually, no. You don't get that there's something off with Misato until we meet Kaji. Here we already know that something's off with Ritsuko, but she seems like a likable person, kinda. She's cold. She's cold. As I said earlier, she's an emotionless shell. But, you know, there's something off about her. And her first line is, great, she's lost again, referring to Misato getting lost on her way to meet Ritsuko with Shinji. When she meets them in the elevator, it's really funny because Misato is like, oh shit. The elevator door will open, Ritsuko's right there just staring her in the eyes, like the blankest stare possible on her face as she walks in, and just nonchalantly walks in. And she doesn't turn around immediately like normal people do. You know how when you get into an elevator, and I mean this, it's actually really funny if you get into an elevator and you just remain standing this way. You just walk on and just remain standing there, right in front of the door, but not turning around to face the door. It's really funny watching people's reactions, and that's what Ritsuko does. Ritsuko doesn't turn around. She has a full-on conversation with Misato and, in some way, Shinji. So almost right from the get-go, I was intrigued by her. I was like, oh, this bitch is... I'm gonna like her. I think I'm gonna like her. But she is extremely cold to Shinji, like her father. In fact, when we discover what happens between her and Gendo later in the series, it makes sense why she sides with Gendo quite a bit, and how horribly she was raised by her her mom. Yeah, we'll get into that later. But she is extremely cold to Shinji. And the first thing she says to him is not, oh, hey, or hello. It's, this is the boy. She doesn't even refer to him by his name. She says the boy. She calls him the boy. This is the boy. Like, there could be a million others. Now, I can't tell if she's doing this on purpose or not, but if she is doing it on purpose, she fails at her job, because Shinji still doesn't want to pilot it. And I think if she was trying to do that, and if Hideki Anno wanted her to do that, it was to make Shinji feel like, I have to do this. I want to be special. I have to do this. But I personally don't really think that that was the intention. I think she was just being really cold and she didn't know how to act to this 14-year-old boy standing in front of her. This is the boy, is all she manages to say. We find out why, but she agrees with Gendo a lot. When we find out why, it's just as disturbing, but she agrees with Gendo a lot, and that's some major foreshadow right there. Let me talk about overall what I liked about this episode. What I like about this episode is when it opens, it fucking opens. Okay? It just throws you into this universe. Do you understand what the fuck's going on? Fuck no. Hell, this is Evangelion. You never know what the fuck's gonna happen. But it just throws you right into this universe. It's very ominous and atmospheric at first, with tanks moving down the road, and you're just you see the oceans, and you see something strange swimming through the waters, and you're like, what's going on? You want to know what's going on, and then finally, when the angel arrives, which I won't get into what the angels are yet, because to be honest, we don't have a clue at this point, so I'm not even going to get into it. An all-out fucking war takes place against this motherfucker, and it's beautiful. It is beautiful. We got helicopters flying around, we have tanks giving it all they've got, and I love it. I love it when the army is portrayed throwing every fucking thing that they possibly have in their arsenal at something. It is beautiful. And me being an army guy, I fucking love it when the army's like, shoot at it, fire everything! To quote Nero from the new Star Trek movie, favorite line of that film, fire everything! And that's exactly what they do. And boy, they do not let up. Does it do anything against the angel? No. But whatever, it's still fun to watch. And then I also wanted to bring this up. I'm going to talk about it when we get to the end of Evangelion, but notice that shot with Rei just hovering over the street when Shinji looks. We don't even know who she is at this point. We know Shinji and that's it. We don't even really know his name. And he just looks over and he sees Rei floating in the middle of the street. Now that is very significant when we get to the end of Evangelion. That's all I'm going to say about that, and I wanted to foreshadow it right now. Something else I noticed in terms of design, all the army vehicles have UN symbols on them, which foreshadows, even though we discovered that what happened was third impact happening, causing the poles to melt, and a lot of the world died, is now underwater because of it. Though at this time we don't know what's going on. All we see is that these are UN vehicles in, not Tokyo, but New Tokyo 3. So we know that some traumatic shit went down in the world. We don't know if it's a post-apocalyptic yet, but we can inference it by this. It's not the Japanese army doing it, even though they call themselves the JSDF, the Japanese Self-Defense Forces. They're being headed by the UN, and it's not Sealay and it's not NERV like we see with these throughout the rest of the series. I love how Gendo is humoring the army dudes by having them in NERV HQ in the Geofront. Really, if you're sitting there, why are the army guys there? They should have their own HQs, right? The only thing that I can really inference at this time is Gendo let them in to use his equipment just to humor them, just to lead them on, because Gendo knows exactly what the Angel has, and the AT field and all that horse shit that blocks everything. But the army doesn't. Or they do, but they don't believe him. So Gendo's humoring them. Gendo's just sitting there being like, and he's just casually talking too with Ritsuko. I'm always gonna have a hard time with that name, I apologize. He's just talking with Ritsuko, whispering, being like, oh yeah, watch this. Yeah, oh, this confirms that the Angel does have an AT field. Oh. They knew that this was gonna happen all the time. They're humoring the army. Humoring them by letting them use their technology. That's great. Already talked about fixing carbon duct tape. The Geofront is gorgeous. If there's anything that the show does, is it knows how to make setting shots. Even when they were running out of money. Well, let's face it, Neon Genesis Evangelion never really had a budget to begin with. And the budget it did have was like squat compared to all the other mech animes being made at this time. However, what's nice about it is that it does look beautiful. Like when we were introduced to the Geofront, there's some great music playing, some very kind of omnipotent kind of music playing. It's very godlike, and but yet very calming at the same time, and it's mixed with yellows and reds, and it looks very fallish. Especially since I live up in the North Country, you know what I mean by fallish. Basically, it's like the fall when all the leaves turn different colors. It was very much like that, very calm, very peaceful looking. I already talked about the confrontation between Shinji and Gendo. Both are bitter towards each other. Shinji has his reasons because, well, his father abandoned him. Shinji doesn't feel loved, but used as an accessory because Gendo flat out goes, or Shinji's like, why, in fact, the letter that Gendo gives to Shinji, all it says is, I need you, or I have a use for you. That's it. And then when Shinji's there, he's like, Dad, why do you need me? And Gendo looks down at him and says, I have a use for you now. That's cold, man. That's really cold. Also, to make him a little more interesting, I just noticed this on this viewing. Gendo knows that Yui's soul, his wife's soul, Shinji's mother's soul, is in the Eva Unit 01. Why doesn't he just tell her this? Why? And the only thing that I could really conclude is he's actually protecting Shinji. And this made me start thinking into Gendo's character a little more. We discover later why Gendo is the way he is, but how you interpret it can be many different ways. And I'm starting to think of it like this. Gendo only knows how to be cold. Gendo only knows... And I won't get into it too deep here until we really get to the episode that I'm talking about. But Gendo only knows how to be cold. Gendo only knows how to give orders. And so I honestly think that with this viewing, I'm like, there is really a lot more to Gendo than meets the eye. I think Gendo is honestly not so much protecting Shinji in this case, because he's throwing him into harm's way to fight an angel. But he's standing there like, I'm not going to tell you that your mom's soul in there yet. Because you're not ready for it. And I don't think I'm ready for it. And I'll leave it at that. Oh no. The Eva, when it fires its beams, you see crosses. Oh fuck, that has to mean something, right? Yeah, we'll get into that later. What I didn't like about this episode. It's so strange. I mean, that's easy. This fucking Evangelion, of course it's strange. And what I mean by that is that... why Shinji? I mean, we discover later why. But at the time, we're sitting there like, why did you wait this? Why did you wait? In fact, you can even still say this even if you watch the series. Why did you wait until now, when the angel is right fucking in front of you, to get Shinji to pilot the robot? When Shinji's piloting the Eva, he's not even wearing the armor. He's just wearing his schoolboy clothing. He doesn't know how to pilot the robot. Of course he's not going to pilot the robot. I'm actually being like, yeah, Shinji shouldn't be piloting this thing. He has no idea what the fuck to do. He's never fought a thing in his life. In fact, I'm pretty sure he has a bigger vagina than he does a dick. But that's all I really have to complain about it. There really isn't much else to talk about. Great way, overall, great way, fucking phenomenal way to start the series. And something that this episode proved to me is that this show's going to be intense when it comes to their characters. In fact, that's where they're going to focus, probably, is their characters. And I wasn't wrong. So stay tuned for the next episode, and stay tuned for a show that I'm doing with Dylan called Ultrathon, where we're looking at every single episode of Ultra 7. So stay tuned for that. And, sayonara.